For better or worse, the formula of From Software's Souls series has become so popular that it seems like every big or small development studio is trying to incorporate some of the franchise's key elements, such as challenging combat and environmental storytelling in their games. While it is undeniable that these elements make for compelling experiences, their proper implementation is tricky and only a few developers manage to create games that could rival the quality of From Software's games. Part of what makes Metroidvanias and Soulslike so all-consuming is their affected pretentiousness. Both genres take from a list of acclaimed titles that put their players' skills to the test, occasionally at the expense of entertainment. Point Blank Games' Stray Blade is a recent addition to this crowded category and, in a circular way, it must also pass muster with fans to earn a place in this particular genre. With its bright and colorful setting, Point Blank Stray Blade already set itself apart from the grim and dark competition and definitely had the potential to stand out from similar games thanks to much better accessibility and some unique combat mechanics, but unfortunately, their execution falls flat, resulting in a game that is way too often more frustrating than fun to play. Unlike other games inspired by the Souls series, Stray Blade features a well-defined character called Farron. At an early age, they got a job as a translator on a trade ship, and since then, they became interested in learning more about the people of the world, so much they eventually became an anthropologist. Their studies of different cultures made them realize that 3 of them have claims on the Valley of Acria, which is where Farron eventually makes their way. Acria, however, isn't just any regular old valley that was contended by different groups for years. It is a magical valley where all those who set foot in it become immortal, at the cost of their freedom, as no one, once inside, is able to leave it. With no choice but to go forward, Farron starts exploring the valley, meeting the elementally enhanced half-wolf, half-Xinan being Boji, not knowing how the mystery behind Acria is much deeper than they might have expected. While action RPGs inspired by the Souls series are hardly focused on story and character development, Stray Blade offers a breath of fresh air in this regard. What is usually a lonely, silent journey through mysterious locations becomes something different in this game, as both Farron and Boji are extremely talkative, constantly providing new information not only on themselves but on the world they live in, the different people that populate it and the history of Acria. At the end of the day, it is not anything particularly inspired. Still, it is undeniable that the development team put quite a bit of care into creating the setting and the lore, which is ultimately enjoyable if expectations are kept in check. The Stray Blade setting and characters, however, are not enough to carry the whole experience. While some of the game's features sound interesting on paper, their execution ranges from flat to outright bad, resulting in an experience that is often not all that enjoyable. Despite being labeled as an action role-playing game, the Stray Blade experience is more focused on action and combat rather than role-playing. Taking the stamina-based combat seen in the Souls series as the basis, the game builds upon it with some unique mechanics, such as perfect parries and perfect dodges mechanics. All enemies in the game are capable of unleashing different types of attacks that must either be parried or dodged, signaled by blue and red flashes, respectively. If a perfect parry is performed, the enemy will receive massive poise damage, making it easy for Farron to deplete it completely and execute surprisingly gruesome execution attacks. On the other hand, if a perfect dodge is performed, Farron's energy will be restored, allowing them to go on the offensive using their equipped weapons' light, heavy or special attacks. On paper, this creates a unique blend between the typical Souls-like combat and the parry systems seen in games like Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Wolong, Fallen Dynasty, and even Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin that should keep players always on their toes, but the execution of this blend is middling. For starters, while all attacks are signaled with the aforementioned colored flashes, their timing is all over the place, making perfect parries and dodges difficult to pull off if the player hasn't perfectly memorized the enemy's movesets. Even then, given how enemies rarely get staggered by Farron's attacks, defending properly all the time is difficult. It feels like the developers wanted to go for a system where players go from offense to defense on the fly, but for something like this, consistent timing between the attack indicators and the attacks themselves actually connecting with the player is even more of a requirement. Due to these issues, the decent enemy variety is a problem, as it just makes these gameplay mechanics feel more inconsistent. Alongside these issues, there are a few more that make combat in Stray Blade more frustrating than it should have been. Stamina consumption for pretty much every combat action is way too high, resulting in getting it depleted way too often, even after upgrading the total amount. The clinkiness of Farron's movement and attacks, the general lack of weight, and the enemy's tendency to gang up on the player make matters even worse. All these issues somewhat render null some of the game's most unique aspects, such as the mechanics that make the world adapt to Farron's success in combat. Visually, combat is a standout, with satisfyingly smooth animations as the characters dodge, charge, slice and execute each other. Enemies flash red to signal an unavoidable attack and flash blue for a parryable attack. Perfect dodges and parries restore some of Farron's stamina. There are also stomach-churningly savage backstabs and finishes, surprising in the cartoony surroundings, and returning to the same area offers opportunities to increase your experience points and improve your skills with your weapon. It is a shame that combat in Stray Blade is so unpolished, as the game does come with some interesting features that could have made it more dynamic and exciting. Farron's companion Boji isn't good at just talking but also learns some extremely useful combat abilities, such as a blast that depletes enemy poise, which can be unleashed once a special gauge is filled up by fighting enemies. The game's weapon system is also tied to the character progression system, as nodes on the fairly straightforward skill tree are unlocked only once perfect mastery has been reached with any given weapon. While some players may see this as an annoyance more than a decent feature, as it essentially forces Farron to use all weapons to reach his full potential, I think this is a good way to make players experiment with different weapons and reward them in some way. Bosi also comes with his own skill tree, which requires players to obtain raw points from exploration, unlike Farron's, whose skill points are obtained by simply leveling up. Exploration is another sore point for Stray Blade, possibly even more than the clunky combat, due to the bad level design. While they honestly don't look too bad, thanks to their colorful aesthetics which are reminiscent of games from the early 2000s, locations are designed in a terribly confusing way. It's almost as if the developers wanted to get as many alternate paths, crevices, caves, and enemy camps as possible, which only makes them hard to navigate without constantly using the compass and the map. And sometimes, even they complicate things, as maps must first be fully revealed by exploring the map and finding specific items, and the compass only indicates the general direction of the main quest objective. All these alternate paths aren't even justified by decent rewards, as what players will find, most of the time, are items used to craft armor and weapons. Even crafting in Stray Blade feels terribly clunky, which is very surprising considering how getting new weapons is so important to expand Farron's combat capabilities. Creating new gear can only be done by smithies once blueprints and all the needed materials have been obtained, but having to take out all enemies in their vicinities is not what makes the process clunky. However, after crafting any item and watching a small cutscene, players are not sent straight to the crafting menu but back on the field. It is a small thing, to be sure, but it's still a weird oversight. The game has a few more of these weird design decisions, such as respawning, which forces players to watch a short, unskippable cutscene of Boji bringing back Farron to the bonfire-style checkpoints of the game. With the current flood of action role-playing games inspired by the Souls series, Stray Blade wasn't setting out to light the world on fire, but the game did have the potential to be much better than it turned out to be. While the experience isn't entirely unplayable when everything clicks together, the clunky execution of most of its gameplay mechanics makes it difficult to recommend the game to anyone but those who live and breathe ARPGs and need to play each and every one of them. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel.